Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have a really interesting conversation planned, some really inspiring speakers. Before we get started, we do have a couple housekeeping points. If you can, please have your camera on to facilitate engagement. Stacy will be monitoring the chat box, and I believe that she has an octopus emoji by her name. If you need to find her, Tiffany is available for tech support. She has a hammer and wrench emoji by her name in case you need to find her. And I will get us started with our land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. Stacy will be putting our land acknowledgement into the chat along with a link to the nativeland.ca website. I also invite you to engage in the chat box throughout today's conversation, share your thoughts, questions, reactions, what's resonating with you, etc. And with that, I'll pass over to Xenia to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm going to introduce myself since I'm still new here. Xenia Jankieri, she and her pronouns, new population health director. Super excited to be supporting this session today. Today, what we will be doing is we'll be engaged in a learning session that might be similar to some of the learning sessions that you all have engaged in the past. I think the caveat that I would add there is that, as you all know, we are in the process of implementing our cohorts, which is a super exciting time for us. And so these network learning sessions are now meant to be additional opportunities to catalyze thoughts, get out there really amazing, work that's happening, theories, analyses, et cetera, that hopefully we can all use when we're moving forward with our cohort work. Today, we're going to be exploring land return movement, land reconciliation, land back. You might see a number of different ways in which we're using this language. Ultimately, I think what we're really trying to do today is continue to ground in what does it mean to not only be living on stolen lands, but ensuring that the practices that we are using move us towards Indigenous sovereignty, which has to include an aspect of land back, land return, land reconciliation. We will have an open discussion after we hear from two amazing panelists, amazing leaders who are panelists today. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So we're really excited for you to join us today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to send it over to you, Liz.
Great, thanks, Xenia. For those of you on the call, I'm hoping that everyone has had a chance to see the packet about the Collaborative Action Network, because that's really the shift that we're making starting with this meeting. And, in that there were a set of principles, some guiding kind of framework that we use. But this was, in the vernacular, to be like, this is our theory of change. These are the things that we see happening that will actually lead to long-lasting change here in the North Sound region. And so these meetings, I think, are on your calendars as like a monthly learning session. But the shift that's occurring this year is really taking that from just learning, which can be sometimes passive, to this is about learning and advocacy and trying to figure out how you can take information that you learn and actually find, your own set of actions that you can take, within your own networks, whether those your family, your, alliances, your organizations, your associations, et cetera. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to create change. If you could go to the next slide, that would be great. So these sessions, as we've done in the past, we're bringing folks from outside of our region and coupling that, typically with the work that's happening here across these 5 counties and with the 8 tribes, and trying to see that, not everything that's exciting that's happening is only happening someplace else. Sometimes those things are happening right in our backyard, and we're not always as conscious of the things and innovations that are happening here locally. So hoping that you get to see some of that as well. And then, lastly, just hoping that you all continue to bring others to this table, because as we created this collaborative action network, it was about the partners who've been working with us for the last 3 or 4 years. But this past week, we've opened the doors pretty widely. So, if you know of others who should be included and would be interested in helping make this region a place where people feel that we're advancing equitable well-being, and it's a place where they feel like they belong, would love to see them also joining in the work that we do. So Xenia, I'm going to turn it back to you, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Liz. I really appreciate the framing that you offered, around the Action Network and, moving us all from a space of learning to learning in action. I think it makes a lot of sense for us to be doing this work, and it really is in alignment with our shared beliefs. So on this slide, you will see shared beliefs. These should not be new for you. If they are, great, welcome. These are the network's shared beliefs. They should be the language that you've seen in your compact, or at least somebody at the organization has seen in the compact. It's really important that we not only ground in these values, but that we really understand what these values mean and what they look like in action moving forward. These are the values that we will be grounding in for each of the cohorts and the work that the cohorts are doing. And so, I think it's going to be really important that, folks, again, understand, kind of explore, play with this language, see what it means to you, to the folks that you work with, and come with any of your thoughts about this particular language into the cohort spaces. Because as we co-design and develop the spaces, we're going to really need to ground in what we already know. And so these are our shared beliefs that we're moving forward in. And if folks have any thoughts, questions, et cetera, please, we would love to engage in a dialogue about how we can operationalize and really live into these shared beliefs. All right, I think we are to the part of the session that I'm really excited about, which is introducing our speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first panelist. So we have two brilliant leaders who are going to chat with us today. The first is one of my current colleagues, someone that you all likely know, Michaela Vendiola, who serves as our tribal and community liaison for North Sound Accountable Community of Health in Washington State. Michaela is Walker River Paiute and Swinomish. She was born in Bellingham, Washington, and raised on the Lummi Indian Reservation. Before joining North Sound ACH in 2019, she worked as a community health representative for a home visit program offered at the Lummi Tribal Health Center. Michaela graduated from Western Washington University with a Bachelor of Science in American Cultural Studies with an emphasis in American Indian health and policy. Michaela is an early career professional with a deep respect and ties to her tribal communities. This, paired with her dedication to the public health workforce, her role provides a suitable opportunity to example a standard for intentionally honoring, upholding, and advocating for tribal sovereignty when serving alongside Indian healthcare systems in Washington. So Michaela, super excited for you to be here, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Xenia. Hello, everyone. It's good to be in this virtual space with you today. As Xenia said, my name is Michaela Vendiola. I'm Walker River Paiute and Swinomish and was raised on the Lummi Indian Reservation. I think to start us off, well, what I'm going to do today, my part of this panel, is I'm going to be sharing some resources that live within our collaborative action network, Community Commons. I've been gathering these resources for this partner learning session in hopes that they'll be useful in our collective understanding of what's happening locally and in the nation around this concept of land reconciliation. But I think first, I just want to emphasize, please utilize the chat option if you have questions or just thoughts that come up. I want to honor the space for you to ask those questions. Okay, So I'm gonna start with like a quick history. It's an example of a local history from Swinomish Indian community. And it's representative of how post the signing of the 1855 treaty that covers this area, land has continued to be taken from like reservation allotment. And this is a significant issue for Native people in the area, for the tribe of Swinomish, because like treaties are the law of the land. So let's get into it. Oh, can I screen share, please? Thank you. Okay. This is on the Swinomish government website, and you can like find it online. It's the boundary map detail, and what this is showing is the original like land border of the tribe. You see it here, Swinomish Indian Reservation. You all might be familiar, folks in Skagit, with this area. There's Padilla Bay, Fidalgo Islands over here, Anacortes is up here. This peninsula is the parcel of land, and this road here, it's a highway. Everything south of this land remains Swinomish Indian Reservation territory. Everything north of it was ceded under executive order. Where is the date? This is interesting. Does anybody know what's on this parcel of land now? Go ahead and you can come off mute or put it in the chat box.
The refinery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the refineries. But that's not it. Also here now is a lot of local businesses that sit along that highway that runs through just about here, as well as a partner that you all are probably familiar with, Gonzales Wellness Center, right here, executive order. And this is significant because it occurred after like the signing of the 1855 treaty, and like the upholding of treaty and sovereignty law is really crucial to government relationships with the tribes. It's what facilitates like cooperation and working together. So if you aren't all familiar with this history, it's just something important to know about. And yeah, I thought I would start with it because it's local to this area. I could tell like a short story that relates to my connection to Swinomish. This is March's Point, and my father grew up on this March's Point territory, grew up going out crabbing with my grandfather, but you can't do that anymore there because of the refinery pollution, as well as just like general pollution to this bay. And that really ties into some of the other resources that I'm going to share with you. The issue around access to traditional foods, waterways. These are all things that were written into the initial treaties and have been advocated for by Indian law advocates and lawyers since they've been doing treaty rights work. Okay, so sorry, my screen has like boxes popping up. I found this article. Wait, where's my time? How much time do I have to talk? Okay. This is an interesting like piece of information because it's current. First off, it's not like far off back in 1870s and whatnot. Nobody's utilizing executive order to like take land currently from one of the tribes in this area, but this is current. The title is "Do Salmon Have Rights? A Legal Battle Between Seattle and the Soxhawtl Indian Tribe That Contests the Rights of Nature Movement." You all should take a moment to read through this article and attempt to come to understanding about it. If you have questions around like what they're talking about, I would be happy to like have conversation with you all. But what this article talks about is the tribes utilizing their like holding and stewardship of the waterways and of the health of salmon to protect salmon in this area. You see these kinds of like moments occurring within the tribes. I guess I shouldn't refer to them as moments. A lot of these like salmon rights advocacies and battles, they stem from the fishing wars in the 1960s. So like how to advocate for clean water and healthy fish, that was a starting point. Looking at the time here, okay. These resources also live within the community commons, and let's see. Oh, this one is the one. Okay. This is also recent and local. Snoqualmie Tribe acquires 12,000 acres of ancestral forest land in King County. And this is a really good example, you know, when people think or hear like the phrase land back or land return, usually immediately your thought is like, what is that? Like, what's that mean? Or like, what's that? And I've had conversations with people about like just them not understanding like it's not to take homes from people or like private property, but rather much more so like ancestral forest lands so that tribes can have stewardship over waterways, salmon, and traditional homelands. I think also now is an important time to say like tribes are leading in environmental protection and advocacy for the environment, clean air, clean water, and something that we talk about in like our cohort work is how to set up or like support a structure that can benefit future generations, future like the youth that are coming into the workforce and who are gonna like they're gonna inherit legacies that we leave. Looking at the chat. Okay. I think I'm gonna wrap up now and just I wanted to stop share. I just wanted to provide those like resources and examples of a couple things that have happened locally, and also you all got the resources within the community commons, so please take time to look at those. Thank you. Back to you, Xenia.
Thank you so much, Michaela. I really appreciated, reading through the resources. I had a chance to look at them early on. I think if, folks, I would definitely support what Michaela said. Take time to look through these resources. They're not only, examples that are happening right now, but they are deeply connected to what Indigenous sovereignty means and what it means to be, at least as a non-Native person, an allyship around Indigenous sovereignty. I think the themes and the frameworks and the deep understandings of Indigenous and ancestral knowledge and wisdom are so important for all of us to be continuing along our journey. And so, Michaela, thank you so much for sharing some of those resources with us. I'm super excited to present our next panelist. After Dr. Gonzalez, who I will introduce in a moment, presents, we will break out into a short small group session and then a short open discussion session. Again, this space is really to help catalyze ideas, thoughts, questions, et cetera, from you all. So thank you for moving with this very rapid and tight and wonderful agenda. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Kelly Gonzalez now, who's a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and an advocate for the Portland urban Native community. Dr. Gonzalez is a tenured associate professor in the Oregon Health Science University, Portland State University School of Public Health. Dr. Gonzalez is the founder of the Indigenous Equity Institute and co-founder of the BIPOC, Black Indigenous People of Color Decolonizing Data Council. All of her work uses the healing justice and Indigenous resistance framework, which provides and promotes systems change to dismantle systemic oppression and bring our communities and Indigenous folks closer to liberation. She uses the tools of public health, including health data, policies, research, and education to advance this work. Dr. Gonzalez is one of the first Native scholars to contribute to the body of science and scholarship that establishes associations between racism as a form of trauma on the health of Native American populations and in reference to diabetes, healthcare engagement, and retention in health interventions. She serves on the Governor of Oregon's Racial Justice Council Health Equity Committee, the Missing and Murdered Women and Relatives of Portland, the Seven Waters Canoe Family, the Seven Waters Food Sovereignty Project, and the governor-appointed COVID-19 Vaccine Advisory Board. She also is the 2021-2022 PSU Presidential Fellow and the inaugural director of the OHSU PSU Indigenous Health Program and the nation's first undergraduate concentration in Indigenous health. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Kelly Gonzalez.
Thanks, Xenia. I appreciate you so much, and thanks for that real warm introduction. And Michaela, it just really warms my heart to hear your words, and thanks for all the work that you do for putting together this really precious time that we have together. And thanks for all those that are surrounding Michaela to help Michaela emerge as a strong Indigenous leader that she knows she can be and desires to be, and that we all as community also surrounding her need her to be. So thank you for that. My name is Kelly Gonzalez, and I'm so happy to be here today. My presentation is less directly about land back. It's more nuanced. The information I have to share directly ties to land back efforts, and I'm presenting to you like one focus area of the larger land back initiative and movement across this nation state, as well as happening in Canada and being led by Indigenous people to fulfill tribal and Indigenous sovereignty and the conditions in which we need today and tomorrow and far into the future to really cultivate communities of care, communities of thriving Indigenous knowledge, thriving Indigenous futures. And the way I think about it is I want to be cultivating that future today from the dreams inspired into me already by my ancestors, which means centering myself in all of the best things, all the best things that Creator brought to us. We are all deserving of those good things, and to cultivate from vibrance and from beauty, meaning then I will be moving towards vibrance and beauty in that future that we're creating. In order to do that for me on a personal level, I've been on a multi-year healing journey to first acknowledge that within me, I have internalized oppressive narratives and oppressive conditions, and lived quite a bit of my life in obedience to that oppression. That's important for me to understand, because once I understand it, then I have the opportunity to heal it and to not stay stuck in the shame and the guilt of maybe not being connected in the right way or full way to my indigeneity. And that I don't have to be responsible for the policies and practices and conditions that have been placed on my body as an Indigenous person within a settler colonial state that has really been designed to erase me and erase my people and erase our histories. So part of my journey has been reconciling what does that mean to cultivate from a place of vibrance and beauty, and how do I reconnect to my ancestral wisdoms, the community wisdom, who's surrounding me, just like we're surrounding Michaela to provide her support, you know, as she's growing and healing and emerging into a really strong Indigenous leader and advocate. And the reason why that community of care and that circle of care is so valuable and needed is that as Indigenous people, we are resisting colonization. We are resisting the conditions of colonization. We are resisting the continual conditions of settler colonialism that are designed to erase and eliminate us, to reduce us, to disempower us. There's not many of us in these positions of decision-making, power building. And when we come to the space full and whole, that just in itself can be unsettling. And always, for me, when I come into the space as my whole, vibrant, beautiful Indigenous self, that's also the place where I experience the most violence from white fragility and the unsettling of white supremacy that just my presence provokes. So our surrounding Michaela is critical if we are absolutely committed to this vision of grounding ourselves in values for systems change for the benefit of all people. So I just want to start with that and give you a bit of my grounding and orientation. So I really believe in our ability to collectively create futures that have all of us in mind, not just the benefit of the majority. In this situation, I'm talking about white colonial settlers. Next slide, please. And I also want to say, you know, I might be talking about things that are disturbing, that I might use language that feels aggressive. And I just ask that as we move through this conversation and this work today that we're doing together, that you think of me in the best way. My intentions are good. I'm human. I'm not perfect. I'm learning the language of balance in like a balanced way to tell truth, and to move us forward. And also tempering my emotions, because this is emotional for me too. So I just ask for some grace. Yeah. So when I think about my work as a PhD Indigenous scholar, trained in research for NIH funding, educating the next generation of public health workforce, I really think about, yes, as American Indians last names, we experience staggering health disparities, and they're persistent and they're well known. And we have we have research and a growing body of research that gives evidence for those disparities, but also gives evidence for the interventions to remedy those disparities. When I think about ending and eliminating these staggering health disparities, I'm thinking about a vision of liberation, of Indigenous liberation. And I'm wondering, like, what does that mean? And what does that mean? What is the pathway to get us there? In one of our community wisdom circles, one of the participants was talking about liberation beyond equity. That it, like, what does it feel to be liberated in person, a liberated person in heart and mind, and in relationship to all things seen and unseen, including self? I think it's a really profound question. And I think that this is a necessary question to move us beyond equity. I think equity is a place to start having these conversations, but equity is not enough to get us to this place of liberation. And the movement of land back absolutely catalyzes this sort of pathway for liberation. It's radical, it's changing, and it starts in the wisdom and the confidence and the beautiful history, not just the trauma history of Indigenous people and our relationship to the land. Next slide, please. So as Indigenous people, we have a lot to contribute to this process. And, I'm asking people often, I know you want to partner with Native people. I know you have in your heart to uplift Native people, but I also want to understand what are the contributions you think that we as Indigenous people have to offer? One of my mentors tells me that as Indigenous people, we are miracle survivors. We are descendants of miracle survivors of genocide. That's very powerful. Another mentor tells me that as Indigenous people, we have songs and protocols and medicines that thrive and sustain life. And that is so incredibly powerful. When I tell my students this, I also ask them, so what are the songs, the medicines, and the protocols in your culture that have the capacity to thrive and sustain life? So when I'm thinking about equity, I'm thinking about a pathway for liberation. And at the Indigenous Health Equity Institute, we're cultivating this idea of Indigenous equity as a pathway for liberation, not just for Indigenous people, but for all people. And we're rooting this pathway in Indigenous values and cultivating it, as I was starting on the first slide, in beauty, in abundance, in vibrance, in all the good things. Am I frozen?
Nope, looks
Next
like you're
slide,
good.
please.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks. Next slide, please. I'm gonna keep going here. So the challenge I have is that I'm about to tell you history, and I am going to try really hard not to get stuck in educating on the history. There's resources for all of us. For me now, I really want to be in the place of creation and thinking about, okay, what does that future look like that we're building that, towards liberation? What is that? So I want to get to my last slides, but I have a few slides to get through first. I'm going to go through them quickly, but just know if you need more education and support on the slides I'm about to show you, we have resources for you, and we will bring everybody along in a good way. So when I'm thinking about land back, I'm first thinking about, okay, equity. What does equity mean? And generally what we're thinking about equity, and this is the definition from CDC, is that, everyone has an opportunity to be healthy and to live good lives, in order to do that, it requires removing obstacles such as poverty, discrimination. So like right now we have quite a few initiatives on anti-racism within different institutions and trying to undo the racism that is embedded within these institutions. But I would say, is this definition inclusive of Indigenous people? Is it rooted in 1492 and the truth of colonization and conquest in our nation state? Do we think about land back, or do we think about where we're doing our work as doing that work on occupied stolen lands of Indigenous people? And if we're not, are we upholding systems of Indigenous erasure and Indigenous genocide? Do our health equity frameworks, including our anti-racist frameworks, are they upholding Indigenous erasure and Indigenous genocide? And it's a good question to ask. And if you don't know the answer to that, then then it might be very true that your initiative is upholding a framework that's not good for the lives and futures of Indigenous people. So Dawn Warren, one of my mentors, who is the director of the nation's first PhD program specific to Indigenous health, he talks about, if we're going to talk about equity and move through equity, then we have to do it through truth. And so truth is a political word, right? Like, whose truth? I would say that this definition of equity is reliant on the truth of white settlers. This definition of equity does not name colonialism. It does not name settler colonialism. It does not name genocide. It doesn't name the truths of my people and my experiences and the oppression even that lives in my body. And it doesn't name healing the lasting impacts of colonization. So I would say that this definition is not a truth that I want to uphold. So how do we reframe that? Okay, next slide, please. So when we're thinking about land back and the health of Native people, we want to understand first and foremost that we are people of the land. We are people of the land, and our health is interconnected to the land. And through conquest, settler colonialism, its very function is to eliminate people from the land. So how can we ultimately be healthy as Indigenous people if we have no connection to the land? And what does that mean when we don't have connection to our homelands, to the lands that our stories and our creation stories emerge from and live and are still there in that land? This is just an example of some of the atrocities that we as Indigenous people experience and face beyond racism that impact our health. So how are we reconciling this? Land back allows us to name these truths, reconcile these truths, heal these truths. These are all the lasting impacts of colonization. And then what is the responsibility of the white dominant institutions and white dominant culture to help in this healing process? What is that role? I know that often I'm in a situation where I'm educating, which is effectively me helping to heal the roots of oppression within, say, public health. I don't have the power to do that healing. It takes a collective, and it takes those who are in the position of power and decision-making who continue to fuel these roots of oppression to do that good healing work. Otherwise, equity for Indigenous people is inconceivable. Next slide, please. Okay, so these next few slides is just a help to provide you better understanding of colonization and colonial logics. All I want to say here is that colonization or colonial logics are distinct from Indigenous values. Colonial logics are steeped in white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy. It's a system of destruction. It is not life-generating, where Indigenous values is about reciprocity to the land, giving thanks and gratitude, believing in the best of each other, being in community and responsible to one another. Okay, next slide. And it is a cycle of life. And as Indigenous scholars talk about, as Indigenous people, we create lives that live life. I love that. This is just a quick definition of settler colonialism. And it's a justification to eliminate Indigenous people from the land, historically and continuing to this day. And these ideas of settler colonialism are upheld by colonial logics that then become embedded within all of our institutions, including academia. And if you don't know about these things, then again, it's an opportunity to ask yourself, how are you unknowingly upholding systems of Indigenous erasure and genocide? If you don't know this information, why don't you know this information? And if it's not available to you, then it'll make it difficult for you to understand and have access to this information. So I'm happy to be here to be sharing this with you. Next slide, please. Am I frozen? Okay, next slide, please. Go ahead and next slide. So one of the things that I want to say on that last slide is that one of the primary logics of colonial, one of the primary tenets of colonial logic is that the land is rapeable, it's extractable for its resources. And because we as Indigenous people are so tied to the land, that also means that Indigenous people are deemed as not valuable, as not valued, and also rapeable. And that transcends in all of our institutions that are dominated by colonial logics and whiteness. These are just some of the strategies of settler colonialism that have created lasting impacts that have been codified at the federal and statewide level in terms of policy. And all of that trickles down to impact how we engage with Native people in the context of, let's say, public health. Go ahead and next slide, please. These are the places where we can get caught up in the drama of the trauma of this history. And as white allies, we want to build our tolerance and recognize that the solution is not to for redemption or to shut down, but we really have to engage in these truths and then ask the question, how do we do different? How do we do different? What does that look like? Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Great, thank you. So I just want to show you like how the colonial logics can become embedded in some of the systems. If you could move back to the slide before. Oh, this is fine. Within public health, we want to recognize that public health was originated in the War Department, and the idea was to protect white settlers from diseases that they believed were made them vulnerable, diseases from Native folks that were in the area, in their neighboring communities that they felt made them vulnerable. Within the context of education, which is where I'm situated as a tenured professor, there, these dams, I recognize them as the barriers that we need to be working toward in order to move towards like a path of equity for liberation. Again, though, so often what you hear us in the community talking about is we go around these barriers. And this is where the folks who are in positions of power, decision-making, they have the ability to commit to strategies, funding resources, healing to dismantle these dams. And I know that lots of dams are being taken down on our rivers to protect our salmon. So I think that when I think about that as a promising opportunity and reality for our institutions as well. And it just takes a collective of people willing to put in that good work. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. This is just an example trying to build my own capacity for this work. I'm also having to heal from the damage of those barriers that I showed. on that last slide with the river and the salmon. So what we're doing now is we're coming out around those barriers and we're creating new possibilities and spaces for us to uplift the conditions needed to advance us to Indigenous liberation. I'm the founder of Indigenous Equity Institute, and you can check out our website, but this is a kind of a summary of our mission, our vision, and what we offer. Next slide, please. We believe that a community rooted in Indigenous values is the embodiment of a healthy community, and it is the pathway to building thriving futures for all of our children and Mother Earth. So we're deeply committed to this, and one of the reasons we created the Institute is that we were realizing that our dreams inspired into us by our ancestors were not being supported within white-dominated institutions. And we need to do this work outside those institutions. And then the folks that want to join us and come and learn, they will show up. Go ahead, next slide, please. One of the primary focus that we give is healing the lasting impacts of colonization, specifically in public health, but also in interconnected disciplines. We seek thriving Indigenous futures across all generations. And we advance this through our vision to uplift self-determined community power building by fostering a community of practice for decolonizing in public health at the level of research, data, policy, workforce, and through community and institutional engagement. This is the pathway of healing the lasting impacts of colonization for life-affirming justice that replaces those systems of Indigenous erasure and genocide. And the Institute is the home where we can be creative. We are offering the engagement for education, but really, I personally want to be moving further into that space of creation and creativity. Next slide, please. Go ahead and go next slide. And this is just an example of some of the services that we offer in the Institute. We're building a community of practice for decolonizing. We're decolonizing public health tools like the concept of Indigenous equity, policy advocacy, and we've created a healing justice, data justice curriculum. We're creating community institutional engagement based on reciprocity and data justice, again, to end data genocide that's happening now to our people. And we're building on the good work of the Urban Indian Health Institute. Next slide, please. When we're thinking about land back, we are thinking about as the Indian collective states, the motivation of land back is to reclaim all the things that have been stolen from us. So our education, our language, our way of life, our land, our health, our futures. So the Institute is within that realm of movement, creating space outside the status quo, outside white dominant colonial institutions, so that we can breathe life into this future that we are wanting for our children and our children's children, based on Indigenous liberation and connection to the things that have been stolen to us. One of the other approaches that I'm taking to help motivate and move forward this movement is, as a tenured faculty at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health, I've created the Indigenous Health Concentration at the undergraduate level. And it's a pathway where students can earn a degree in public health and a minor in Indigenous studies. And the curriculum is engaging with community as co-facilitators and oriented from a strengths-based, trauma-informed approach, knowing already that Indigenous people have something so beautiful to contribute to public health, eliminating disparities, for Native people and creating conditions that uplift the health and lives of all people. This is exciting. It's the first of its kind in the nation at the undergraduate level. And I think about the impact that workforce coming through this concentration could really make to our systems, especially when we're talking about systems change. Next slide, please. And I'm just about wrapping up. I want to offer this as another framework for like equity and land back and, you know, this movement of systems change. This was created by Adrienne Maree Brown. She's talking about we will seed better worlds. And then this framework that of like, these would be health indicators, mutual aid, reparations, land back. What would it be if at university gave back its land to the Indigenous people? What if they did other things like a certain percentage of grants go to systems change and go to supporting conditions to thrive Indigenous knowledge and students and faculty? Next slide, please. And next slide. Okay. And go ahead and go all the way, keep going, please. I'm running out of time. I just want to show, like, this is another, these slides here. This is what we did during COVID-19. We came together and we took care of our community in the best way. We do it for our children and our children's children. This is who we're building for. So the work is worth it. But it takes all of us collectively to believe in it and then to do the collective and individual and system level healing of the lasting impacts of colonization, and to really root ourselves in the promise of these young ones here. And what the future holds for them is really up to us. And we have the opportunity to think outside of the status quo and to do things that are bold and beautiful and abundance-based, and really centering on what did these youth, these beautiful Indigenous youth, need to thrive in the future? What do they need to thrive now? And what are the conditions that we're supporting to end Indigenous erasure and Indigenous genocide? Because this is who we're doing that work for. And my daughter's right there. She's the third one over. But all these kids are my nieces and nephews. So, and that's just how we are in a community. You know, we're taking care of one another in this good way. So I'm going to end here and say thank you all for your time. Apologies for going over.
Thank you so much, Kelly, Dr. Gonzalez. I have a whole page full of notes and ways that, you know, I have been so gently called in by you, and a reminder of like all the things that, you know, the learning that I need to continue. And, you know, hopefully others have taken a lot from both of the panelist presentations today. We are going to send you all into a couple of small groups. We do end at 11:15, so we hope folks can stay until the end. We're going to send folks to small groups, maybe for like 5 to 7 minutes. I will let our super user guru identify which of those times feel best. We've got a couple of prompts we're going to set into the chat for you all in your small groups, and then we'll come back as a larger group. So think about what you heard from our amazing panelists, and we hope that you all have an opportunity to talk to each other within the small group a bit. Well, folks, hopefully I know that folks are starting to come back. Really appreciate the time that you all spent in those small groups. And I'd love to take just maybe like 1 or 2 questions that folks have, or things that came up in their groups, you know, questions that Michaela and Kelly could answer, respond to. I know at least in my group, folks had some really good thoughts. Feel free to drop the questions or comments in the chat. Thanks to folks that are naming that they have to jump off. We will see you soon. All right, don't be shy. All right, maybe as we're waiting, I don't know if Michaela, you have anything else that you want to offer, anything that's come to your mind or heart after hearing the other presentation by Dr. Gonzalez?
Yeah, just a thank you to Dr. Gonzalez, and that the program at Oregon sounds really interesting. There's another one that I'm like a little bit familiar with out of North Dakota State University, or excuse me, the University of North Dakota. They have the first PhD in Indigenous health in the nation. We have some questions coming out. Xenia, do you want to see those?
Yeah, totally. So there was one question about data justice, and I wonder with just a couple of minutes left, maybe we could just speak to kind of what we know about data justice.
Yeah, I could touch on that real quick.
Yeah.
And Dr. Gonzalez, are you still on? Okay. I'll do just a really short definition. It's like the ability for tribes to collect data like sovereignly in a way that's useful to them. There's a long history of misuse of data of Native people by non-natives for like educational purposes, and the data not being returned back to the people or used against them even. So we have a lot of experts, and I'm going to pass it to Dr. Gonzalez to talk about what she thinks of when she hears data justice.
Thank you, Michaela. Dr. Gonzalez, would you like to take a couple
Thanks,
minutes?
Michaela. Yeah, sure. And it's a big question to answer in like 30 seconds, but there are resources, and you can Google it. Contact us later as well if you want additional information and support. Urban Indian Health Institute is doing some great work around Indian or for data justice as well. But one of the other pieces, in addition to data is power, and how we interpret the findings of those data is important to think about. The questions that we're asking is also important to think about. Are we asking those questions, the research questions, interpreting the data from a lens of being in relationship with Native people, being centered on the wisdom and experiences and sovereignty and strengths of Native people? Are we projecting sort of a paternalism and deficit-based orientation to those research questions and findings? Are those research questions grounded in the experiences of Native people and the nuances? And then the other piece is, do Native people even exist in your data, or are they categorized as other? When we are categorized as other, you effectively can't say anything about our people, and that's damaging. That's a form of genocide.
Yes, well, I think we should leave it on that note, because as Dr. Gonzalez said, the questions that you all have are not things that we can answer in this time period. I hope that we didn't give the assumption that we would. I also think that there have been a lot of beautiful gems shared here today that hopefully we can all pick up and do our continued learning with. We will keep the questions that you all put in the chat, because I think they're really going to be great for our cohorts to kind of talk about, and potentially even future, work. Hopefully, Dr. Gonzalez, we can, begin this relationship building with you, and even potentially bring you back into the fold of the work that we do. The work that you are doing is so incredibly important, and I appreciate you very much. And Michaela, clearly the work that you've been doing with us at North Sound ACH and before has created a deep foundation for our learning here. So much appreciation to both of you for this, and for you all, those of you that are still here, for staying with us throughout this time. So you will get the slides, you will have the recording. We'll make sure that all the links referenced are up for you all. As Dr. Gonzalez said, there's some keywords that folks can search, some key organizations and initiatives that we can all do some continued learning around. And I'm going to send it over to Marco, my colleague, to close us out.
Thanks so much, Xenia. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much, Michaela and Dr. Gonzalez, for educating us today on these important topics. So we just want to kind of share some some next steps and kind of final thoughts. We're compiling a resource library, and we're kind of in the process of that. We're excited to share this library with you all when it's complete, and it will house all the resources and all the materials associated with all the cohorts. We also want to invite you to take the survey. Please take a few minutes to complete the poll survey that is being shared in the chat. I think they're gonna, if it's not in the chat yet, they're putting it in the chat. The link will also be listed on the slides if you need to return it and take it later. The survey not only helps us understand what worked and what didn't work with these sessions, but it's also a requirement for contracted collaborative action network partners. Your organization must complete a poll survey in order to track attendance and action this as a participant in the equity cohort. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to provide this thoughtful feedback to us, and also just want to say a final thank you to Dr. Gonzalez and Michaela Vendiola for your wisdom that you shared with us today, and I hope we could all take something away from the presentation, help us think about some of these topics and in a different way, and how we could be of service to the original people of these lands. And so with that, I think that's pretty much the closing. I don't know if are there any last words? I know we maybe got 2 minutes left.
I don't have any last words. I would offer space if anybody has anything. Liz, is there anything that you'd like to say to wrap us up? Otherwise, we can close out, as Kelly would say, in a good way.
Yeah, no, Xenia, I'm probably just going to echo what you put in the chat, that, this is really like our monthly collection of everyone, but this work that's going to happen inside the cohorts, we're trying to actually just have this notion of equity, tribal learning, social justice, dismantling all those structural barriers, be a part of all of the work in all of the cohorts. So just echo that. So grateful for you all making the time today, and we look forward to all the work in the coming year.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye.